The Gospel of Gold by G.S. Lewis. Chapter 48. Joy Comes with the Morning. The goldberry trees were breathtaking. They stood like living Grecian pedestals, upon which seemed mounted great piles of golden coins. The only other time gold had been around such a fruit tree, he had not been able to properly appreciate it, for the surrounding undergrowth had obscured most of its features. But these, he could hardly believe his eyes. Not only were they as tall and strong as 30 years of growth should have required, but there seemed to be one at every street corner. How could this abundance have come from his planting of a single seed? It couldn't have. At the base of the nearest tree stood 3 elderly men with their backs turned, weeping openly as they talked excitedly among themselves. It was the wise trio.
Like the ancient ones from Bell Chime Trail. But look! These bear fruit! Yes, and they're bell-shaped! Bell-shaped! It's remarkable! Listen! Can you hear it? There is faint noise of chimes!
As he stood in the doorway of the Pokemon Center, drinking in the sights and sounds of the morning, Gold only saw his father coming to him at the last moment. Then he was swept up in his arms, crying with relief and joy at their reunion again, after danger had passed. Nearby, Junichi and Marina were having a similar experience as their own families descended upon them. For a long time afterward, they did little more than hold one another while giving disjointed accounts of everything that had transpired. Passerby, who had come out to admire the trees, lingered as they recognized their trainer candidates on the steps. The crowds grew steadily, and soon reporters appeared among them. Little by little, Gold gathered tidbits of new information amidst all the inquiries directed at him. Ecruteak was in better shape than just about any other city of Johto, but all had ultimately weathered the night. Team Rocket had been put in what was, for them, the usual role of playing domestic terrorists. While some members took to the task with glee, most were petty delinquents who were more into the business of stealing, as was their norm. This was why, in spite of the many arrests, there was a mercifully small list of human casualties. The Rockets were not a hardened criminal militia, but a leaderless band of punks without a plan by the night's end. A lot of Pokemon had been hurt, of course. Before dawn, there was a shortage of bandage wrap, and towns without functional Pokemon centers became desperate for medicine. But they were amazed and overjoyed to discover that, in the first light of morning, trees had sprung up, laden with healing berries. In every place Gold had visited and planted seeds, this was the case, and always there was at least one goldberry tree accompanying them. Of all the miracles done in the region, this one gained the most widespread regard. Every trainer who fed his injured Pokemon with a berry beheld its healing virtue in seconds. Then he remembered who had passed through, whose namesake bore such resemblance to the life-giving fruit. Much of Johto was like a tree that had been pruned. The most evident examples were the high places. Sprout Tower and Goldenrod Tower were burned beyond salvation, though Bell Tower and Olivine Lighthouse had been spared. Half of the gym leaders had stepped down, either by compulsion or their own compunction. Likewise, the Elite Four were disintegrated. Will and Bruno gave themselves up without a fuss, almost cheerfully, and Lance went on record, promising to testify to their change of heart. Koga and Karen were taken into police custody far less willingly, swearing they would fight the injustice of it to the bitter end. One thing was for certain. The Johto League tournament was not happening this year. The news networks were split in opinion. Some maintained that Lance and Gold were criminal suspects who shouldn't be running free, while others showed the footage of Karen's last stand, claiming it was grounds for acquittal. The people would have to decide. Speaking of which, the population was noticeably reduced, not on account of deaths, but the transfer of the newly exposed criminals to jails. It would take the court system some time to process so many, and some would escape, but most wouldn't. The populace seemed to have a new heart in them. Eventually, as the noon hour neared, Gold found he was hungry, and the crowds dispersed for lunch with some urging from the police. There was still much to discover and discuss, but Gold would take an hour away from the masses. He and his friends received a lunch bag each from the Pokemon Center cafeteria, but the place was still too packed for his liking, and his home remained too hazardous to enter. That was when Morty happened along and tossed 3 badges at the Ecruteak trio. "You guys have done more to prove yourselves than anyone who's ever beaten my gym," he said with a smile as they gawked at him. "That badge is useless in the competitive respect, but it'll get you to Bell Tower. I expect you could stand to have a little peace and quiet." After thanking him profusely, Gold, Marina, and Janichi took time for a leisurely stroll down the Bellchime Trail, arriving at last at the foot of Bell Tower, the roost of the Phoenix. There they reposed themselves in the cool shade and watched the golden leaves dance on the surrounding trees. July had not yet arrived, yet this was like resting in the midst of an eternal, deathless autumn.